Hey guys, thanks for checking this video out. Hopefully this will be helpful. This is going to go over the basic operations of Live Professor, how I use it for processing audio, and yeah, just some basic functionality, how the audio is patched, creating snapshots, and then how to trigger them using Midi from a console or a controller or any Midi device really. Theoretically, it could come out of Ableton and have it pre-programmed. And then how to set up a show file as well. And just some basic settings you should be aware of. So yeah, so we have Live Professor open right here. And then we'll go ahead and maximize this. So basically what you're looking at is on the left, you have your audio settings and your patching. And on your right, we have our global snapshots, and that's the one that we'll want to pay attention to, as well as project tempo, which we won't really need to worry about at this point. Our DSP usage and buffer size, which is something to pay attention to, and as well as your project name. The other things I haven't needed to really futz with. So if there's something that through the course of this video you see that I do, or something that will be helpful, throw it in the comments below. And you know, if you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe, and hit that bell notification as well. That helps, so anytime I post a video you can see it. So yeah, so we'll get started. So what I've done here is we'll go in the kind of the back door, some of the stuff, and just kind of check out some things to be aware of. So if we go to options and go to audio MIDI options and audio device settings, this pulls up how the audio is getting in and out of this computer, what device it's using, the sample rate, buffer size, and all of that. I'm not going to go into a huge in-depth on like buffer size. I'm sure that there's enough resources on the internet you can find on what buffer size is and why it's important to pay attention to that. But your buffer size is right here. Basically, your buffer size is the time it takes for the audio to go in, get processed, and come out of the computer. That will vary based on what plugins you're running, how many plugins are in line. And so anytime you're running plugins, it's really important to be aware of how many plugins and your latency, the time it takes to get the audio in and back to out of the console to the computer and then back. And just to be aware of that, because if it becomes too much time, you're going to start to run into issues where, for instance, if you had a talking head talking on stage, and you can hear that person talking on stage, and you send that signal to the computer and back, and there's too much latency, you will hear the person talk, and then you'll hear it come out of the PA. It can be very disorienting and distracting. So while you might be able to actually patch your audio and process it the way you want, if you hear two of the same signal, it can be really disorienting and distracting. So you don't want to do that. And also, you know, sometimes you don't need to overcomplicate it either. You know, if you have something like a talking head and you just need some basic EQ, use the built-in EQ, the channel EQ on your console. You know, if there's something that you need to EQ more than what your channel EQ can do on your console, it's very possible that there's something wrong, either with the source, the microphone, your wireless system, if you're using wireless, your speaker system. You know, there's some instances where you will want to do extra processing, right? That's the whole point of this. But, you know, through this whole thing, you want to make sure that you're not overcomplicating it just because you've seen other people do it. You know, make sure it's going to make a big impact, you know. Like for pitch correction, for instance, that is going to make a significant impact. You're not just overcomplicating that just to overcomplicate it. It's going to have there's going to be an impact to that. The other thing with latency I should mention is if you are running something that has multiple mics on it, you want to make sure all of those microphones are running through Live Professor. So what does that mean? Your drum set. Don't just put your snare top mic through Live Professor because you want to compress just a snare top microphone. You're going to run into phasing issues. So what does that mean? So your signal's arriving at different times, And I'm not going to go into huge depth with this because there's resources online to learn about phasing and time arrival. But basically, the long story short, they all need to run through this. So they all arrive back at the console at the same time. If they're all 10 milliseconds behind, 20 milliseconds behind, 30 milliseconds behind, that won't be super noticeable. But if you have all of your drums showing up at your 0 point, right? Like there's no delay that's being added from Live Professor because it's not running through Live Professor except your snare, then it's very possible that you could run into an issue. Your drum could sound hollow, it's gonna sound phasey, like washy. So just the rule of thumb, if you're gonna do something like your drums, something that has multiple microphones on it, run all of the microphones through it. Even if you don't care to process all of the microphones, run them all through so then they come back at the same point in time. And it's also to be aware, and I believe once we load in a plugin here in Live Professor, you'll see it'll give you a reported latency that the plugin adds, and that's something to be aware of as well. Some plugins don't really add any latency, some do. If you're running a plugin that has a latency that it adds, you need to put that plugin on all of those microphones so they all get delayed the same amount of time, so they all come back at the same point in time. Even if that plugin isn't doing anything, the signal's running through it, it's being processed and coming back, so they all show up at the same point in time. It's really important to do that. Personally, what you're gonna see at the campus that I'm at, where this is running, we're not doing anything with drums. I believe all we're doing is vocals for pitch correction and a little bit of compression. And I think that's it. So let's take a look real quick at these settings here. Sorry about that tangent, but it's just something to be aware of when you're doing these things, because you can run yourself into a hole real quick and just make stuff way worse. So anyway, some of this is self-explanatory. Output, input, this is literally the device that the software is going to use to get your audio in and out. Soundcraft Midi USB combo, that's the expansion card on the back of the Soundcraft SI Expression console that we have. So basically it's going out, the audio is going out that device and it's coming in on the same device. There's going to be another video that I make that goes into more detail on the power that the software has, because you can have your source and your destination, your input and your output, in two different devices. And I'll go into that later. But it's very handy to be aware of that you can do that with this. Sample rate, 48K, 48 kilohertz. That's the sample rate. 4800 is what the console is running at. When you're, my understanding is this has to be set to whatever the device is set to, because your samples then will get mismatched and you're gonna get running into pops and clicks, and I don't know that it'll even let you run at a different sample rate than your audio device. I think there's some software that will, and it won't work correctly when you do that. But in this case, the console runs at 48,000 hertz, 48K. So Live Professor needs to be set to 48K. I believe most consoles run at 48K. There's a couple that run higher, but that's kind of a standard. And as you can see, there's no other option anyway. So just something to be aware of. And then audio buffer size. So this is what I talked about the amount of samples that it takes to process the audio. Ours is set to 512. Basically, the lower you have it, the faster the audio is going to get in, get processed, and sent back. There would be less of a delay, right? And so you can see it says 10.7 milliseconds, and the reported latency right now is 3.25 milliseconds coming in, and then 3.02 milliseconds going out. This number should change based on what plugins are in there, or on your specific channel. And then the I/O is literally in and out. 32 inputs available going in, 32 outputs going out. So basically that's an overview of what your settings are. The other thing is your patching. So what this software allows you to do, if we go to audio inputs and outputs, you can turn on and off different inputs in here, and it will select what's available when you're creating your actual project. So what's that mean? Well, basically my understanding is basically, somewhere it actually says that I learned this. The less inputs and outputs you have selected, it essentially will give you more processing. So if you're on an older computer and you only want to do 1 or 2 channels, like you have like your lead vocal, and you just want to pitch correct your lead vocal, you can just have input 1 selected, and that will be your lead vocal. And you can get more processing out of it rather than having all 32 channels enabled. And so it'll kind of get you a little bit more horsepower, where the program, Live Professor, is you're basically telling it, hey, don't worry about all of the other inputs and outputs, just focus on this one. And it kind of will give you a little bit more processing power, that's kind of handy. And then MIDI devices is literally your MIDI devices. So you see USB MIDI interface, that is USB from the computer, and then it's going to the MIDI ports on the Soundcraft console. So you could do this with an analog console if it has the ability to do scenes or snapshots and the MIDI ports on the back. You could literally do this with that. You could set it up with a controller, like a touch controller, like one of those MPDs, I believe it is. You hit a pad and that triggers that snapshot. And so that will show up in this list. Whatever the device is plugged in, the computer recognizes it, and it shows up in this list. And you just need to make sure that that use button is ticked. At default, this is just some default stuff from when the program opens, which I've not really configured any of that. So when you open Live Professor, it's going to look like this. Just a blank slate, essentially, and just showing your buffer size, your DSP use. It's literally not doing anything right now. So to start from scratch, we just hit the plus button, and this will pull up a chain, which is literally, it's a signal chain, right? So your signal chain, we could do, we'll do lead vocal. You can pick a color if you want. Do you want it to be stereo, mono? You can have like surround sound if you wanted to. I have not had a need to mess with any of that. You can set up side chains and auxiliary outputs. It's important to understand signal, have a good grasp of signal flow when you're doing this, because this program is really powerful. And there's a bunch of things in here that I honestly have not messed with because I haven't needed to. Hopefully in the future I'll be able to dig in a little bit deeper on this, but just kind of giving you an overview of what I do, what I've needed to do, and how I've gotten it to work to accomplish what we've needed to do. So if we wanted to add multiple chains, we could go ahead and add them like this. So let's say we have 3 vocalists, right? And we'll just do vocal 1. Let's just do that. And then right here, what you can do is it will, if you select 1, it will, as it creates these 3 chains, it should incrementally automatically patch your audio to input 1. The second chain will be input 2, output 2. The third chain will be input 3, output 3, if that kind of makes sense. So as you create your chains, or your channels, really, it will automatically patch incrementally your audio. So if we just go ahead and hit OK, it should create 3 of them. And if we click on them, in 1, out 1, in 2, out 2, in 3, out 3. Now you see that it kind of named these and just put numbers next to them. So I guess technically we really didn't need to name it in that other dialog because we need to go back and make this accurate. So if we double click on it, we can just fix this. Oops. Vocal 2, I'm going here, vocal 3. So now we have our 3 vocal chains that are patched, in 1, out 1, in 2, out 2, in 3, out 3, okay? So now your audio is patched. So if we were to send signal through this from whatever your device is, this could be an interface, it could be a soundboard, it could be your Dante network. However you patch it into the computer's input for this device is in 1, out 1. So this is passing the signal in and right back out. And if you see, I mentioned there's a reported latency, it's this number right there. That is the total delay. So there's no plugins in this, so it's not adding any delay to the signal. It's just that baseline where we saw in here. It's just this baseline measurement right there. That's all that you have that you're running into right now. So those are channels, and then the next step is let's add some plugins. So if you hit this plus button, this pulls in everything that's in your library. Right here at this campus, it's very, very minimal. We have F6, which is a dynamic EQ. If you want more information on how this works, I would suggest just go to the Waves website, read about this. It's a great plugin. It's an EQ that is responsive to the different frequency bands, basically. It's kind of like a multi-band compressor, although I don't think it's considered that. The nice thing about this is this does not add any latency, so 0 milliseconds. So this plugin has no latency. It does not add any latency to your signal. So let's do this. I don't probably ever set that like that, but we'll just, for the instance of showing you how the settings can be restored in a moment, we'll just leave that like that. And then we'll go ahead and add Waves tune. So this is probably the one you're interested in. Pitch correction. I love Waves tune. It's really easy to work. Basically, if you leave this stuff like this, it's gonna sound natural. I don't really ever need to touch this. You can do the T-Pain thing if you want. Just basically do that, and now you're a T-Pain. But if you want to just make it sound good and help improve the natural pitch of your singers, literally leave these like this, and I haven't really needed to mess with them. The other thing you can do is pick your range. That helps it detect your pitch, and then set this in the music that I'm usually working with. It's CCM music, it's contemporary Christian music. 90% of the time, it's a major scale, and then you just set your key. You want to do B flat, just big B, little b, or A flat, or A sharp, and it'll automatically select the notes in that scale. I'm not going to go into any more detail on how this plugin works. You can learn how to use it. There's, again, go to the Waves website and read up on it, some videos on it. I'm sure there's resources on how to learn how to use this stuff. But basically, click that, click this, pick your key, and then you'll be off to the races. And your audio is already running through this, so it should be coming in and going out back to your console exactly how you need it to operate, and your pitch correction, and your EQing, and you're good. You're ready to go for that channel. And then you can add for your other channels however you want, right? And you'll notice as I've added these plugins, the DSP has gone up just a little bit, but your latency should be the same because you're still at 0 milliseconds. So the next thing I'll go over real quick is your snapshots. If you hit the plus button, you can name it. So let's just do song 1. Hit OK. So now anytime this snapshot is recalled, it will recall these settings exactly how it sits. So let's go ahead and change this. So song 2 will be like that. And we want this to sound terrible, so we'll do that. And we'll go ahead and add this. Song 2, new snapshot. Hit OK. So now, anytime this snapshot is recalled, it will pull these plugins back to that setting. So how do you actually recall these? If you double click on it, it will recall them. So that is one way, the easiest way maybe not the easiest, but the simplest way to recall your settings. So you don't have a MIDI device to trigger this stuff. You can simply click on it and it'll recall your settings. Simple. So the next thing with snapshots I should go over is how to update them. So say we're in song 2, it's like, oh, I didn't mean to put the song in the key of B, or it was actually B flat and I forgot to hit that. Well, if you make that change and go back to song 1 and go back to song 2, it's not going to recall that change because it wasn't stored. So if you make your change, you need to click on this gear icon for the snapshot that you need, and then go to update snapshot. What that will do is it will update the current state of all of your plugins for all of your channels to that snapshot. So if we hit this, now if we go back to song 1, it recalled song 1, now go back to song 2, it recalled it with the flat added to that key. Hopefully that makes sense. And you just repeat this process. You want whatever. This is going over here, and then we're going to add song 3, and now it recalls. super fast, super easy, boom, and you're ready and rocking. And whatever plugins you have, however many channels you have, that's what you've got going on, right? So the next thing is, how do we get these to recall from a MIDI device? Well, it's actually pretty easy, because we have in here, audio MIDI options, MIDI devices, we have, remember that USB to MIDI interface that's connected to the console? If we go to this little icon here, that is like a MIDI. If you've ever seen a MIDI connection, that's what it looks like. It's a 5-pin DIN connector. So if you click on this button, what that does is it pulls up the little, it's like a MIDI configuration for that snapshot. And it's saying no trigger set. So basically, it's not going to trigger from anything because nothing is set to it. So what we can do is hit this learn button, and now it says listening. What that means is any MIDI command that comes into the computer with that MIDI device, it will set to trigger that snapshot. Okay? So if I go to the cue list, and I just have to go here, I'm on the console right now. So if I was to recall the MIDI cue on my console, so now you see that just showed up. It said program change 1. So that is the MIDI command that I have embedded into the cue on the audio console. And so when that audio console cue gets recalled, it sends this MIDI command to Live Professor. So what's that mean? So say if we're on song 2, and I go ahead and recall song 1, so I have it labeled on the console as song 1. If I recall song 1 on the console, it automatically recalls song 1 in Live Professor. So if you're kind of picking up what I'm putting down here, basically you just keep adding cues in your console, and then do the MIDI learn function for each one of your cues, and then as you advance down your cue list on your audio console, it will automatically follow you in Live Professor. And you can bounce around. You say you're not in a church, or say you're with a band and you have a set list and you jump around the set list, but you have all of your cues stored in Live Professor and in your audio console. Well, that's fine. If they start going into whatever the song is, you can just scroll through your list and find the song and hit recall, and this will follow it as well. So as long as you have separate MIDI notes for every single song, this will continue to recall each song or snapshot or cue independently and correctly every time. So it's been a really cool function to make use of. And since it's MIDI, it doesn't have to come from a soundboard or a controller. You don't have to manually advance it. So what we're doing, we run everything out of Ableton. And so what you could even do is, because Ableton plays back MIDI tracks, any DAW really can play back MIDI tracks. So if you're using backing tracks, you could, if you wanted to, program a MIDI note at the beginning of the song. And when that song gets triggered and starts playing, like the backing tracks, your click track, that whole thing, it will automatically send the command. It'll just play the MIDI note back, and that MIDI note can show up here and it'll trigger your snapshot. So there's a lot of automation. If you just want to put the time in to program it, there's a huge amount of potential to automate this stuff. And it's been super reliable for the few years that I've been using this. I really have not had any issues with it. So it's really something that's worth looking into. But literally, to run it out of a DAW or like Ableton, for instance, you just create a MIDI track and then pop in a MIDI note and just play that note back when you would hit learn and then listening, and just play that note back. Just start the song basically, and then it'll pick up the note, and then anytime it picks up that note, it will trigger your snapshot. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions at all, throw them in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification to be notified when I make some more videos. If you have any thoughts on this, throw it in the comment section. If there's any questions, something that I missed, something that doesn't make any sense, put it in the comments. Let me know. If there's something else I can go into more detail on, let me know. I want these videos to be as helpful for you as possible. So thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll see you on the other side.